biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. It is our Friday weekend edition, my favorite show of the week. And I do have actually one of my favorite co-hosts in studio with me, Michael Berry, who is Deputy General Counsel at First Liberty Institute. And one of the reasons I love Michael is because of his military background. And he added that dimension when he came to First Liberty Institute in 2013. He spent 7 years before that in the Marine Corps, and he was practicing law there. Michael, thank you for being here.
Well, it's great to be back.
You've been so busy, you haven't been able to come in and co-host, but I'm glad you could today.
Yeah, it's great to have the opportunity and a little freedom in the schedule to get back here again.
Well, that's good. Well, we have an exciting day. Neither of us are in Washington, D.C., where perhaps it would be fun to be right now because the Values Voter Summit is going on. That's, of course, the big convention put on by the Family Research Council and other organizations that sort of fall in line with some of the things we talk about here at Point of View. And the big news there, of course, is that Donald Trump spoke to the group this morning. He is the first sitting president to speak at this Values Voter Summit. Some outlets are reporting Trump becomes first sitting president to speak at hate-filled Values Voter Summit. But he wasn't hate-filled, and this was it was an interesting speech. It was really a good speech. We're going to actually, well, it's the first time he's addressed the VVS. He addressed as a candidate. He addressed as the nominee. And let's just hear a little bit from those remarks of Donald Trump at Values Voter Summit.
Everyone here today is brought together by the same shared and timeless values. We cherish the sacred dignity of every human life. We believe in strong families and safe communities. We honor the dignity of work. We defend our Constitution. We protect religious liberty. We treasure our freedom. We are proud of our history. We support the rule of law and the incredible men and women of law enforcement. We celebrate our heroes, and we salute every American who wears the uniform. We respect our great American flag. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And we stand united behind the customs, beliefs, and traditions that define who we are as a nation and as a people. George Washington said that religion and morality are indispensable to America's happiness, really prosperity, and totally to its success. It is our faith and our values that inspires us to give with charity, to act with courage, and to sacrifice for what we know is right. The American founders invoked our Creator 4 times in the Declaration of Independence, 4 times. How times have changed, but you know what? Now they're changing back again. Just remember that.
And he said so much more, lines like, we don't worship government, we worship God. He got a standing ovation, Michael, when he spoke of appointing Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. He also noted that on the National Day of Prayer, he signed an order on religious liberty, which eased the enforcement of the Johnson Amendment, which regulates political activity in churches. And then he reminded the crowd of what we discussed on Point of View with your colleague Jeremy Dyes last weekend here, how he significantly weakened enforcement of the contraceptive mandate in Obamacare, and also broad new protections for religious liberty through the Justice Department, which I'll let you kind of explain in just a minute. He also said, we're stopping the attacks on Judeo-Christian values, and he said, we're saying Merry Christmas again. That was one of his lines during the campaign. And then at the end, he said, as long as we have pride in our country, confidence in our future, and faith in our God, then America will prevail. So it was a great speech at the Values Voters Summit, and boy, the crowd really loved it, didn't they?
Yeah, he certainly knows his audience, and he knows how to get them behind him and excited about what the future might portend for our nation.
Yeah, it is refreshing to have a champion in the White House, and of course, he was elected by. I mean, evangelicals supported him in great numbers and expected a lot of him, and people were surprised about that. But talk a little bit about this order, this change at the Department of Justice, where, I mean, we had, even in the Clinton administration, some protections for religious liberty, but this has been strengthened, and well, it was actually weakened under Obama, but it's been strengthened now under President Trump, hasn't it? That's right.
I think the orders that we saw come out, or the order that we saw come out back on the National Day of Prayer, which was May the 4th, and then followed up just this past Friday with the Department of Justice issuing these memoranda on the HHS mandate, so easing some of the famous Little Sisters of the Poor case, easing the burden of the contraceptive mandate on religious organizations and people like that. And then also the DOJ memo on religious liberty, which is, if anybody's had the chance to actually look at it, it is pretty robust. It goes over 20 points. You might call them 20 principles of religious freedom. And then there's even an attached appendix that is, many, many pages long itself, that goes into really the underlying principles that support and undergird those 20 points. So there's really a lot to chew on there for constitutional lawyers, for people who support religious freedom. And I also believe that going forward, those are the legal positions that we can anticipate that the administration will be taking in any litigation that might be forthcoming that deals with religious liberty. So it's kind of a signal and a guidepost to Americans that this is where the administration stands on these issues. Well, it's refreshing, ladies and gentlemen. We've got a packed show today, and religious liberty, of course, always front and center on Fridays on our weekend edition. Today, perhaps more than normally. We are going to talk about judicial confirmations. There's been sort of a change in the rules. The president he's been intentional about appointing good judges, but the Senate has had to take an action to speed up confirmation of the nominees, and we'll talk about that. Some people are critiquing the Senate for doing that. Also, the Boy Scouts, well, they're going to let girls in now. Are we surprised? Is this a good development or not? And then later in the program, we'll also talk about Obamacare, because the president has made some changes that will actually open it up to the free market. Congress didn't do it, so the White House has got to do it. And as always, we will take your calls here at Point of View. We'd love to have you join us, especially on Fridays where we talk about so many issues. Stay with us. We'll be back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You may have noticed that the contentious issues in the culture war seem to be coming faster and with more intensity. In a recent commentary, Kevin Williamson validates that observation. He begins by reminding us how long it took for homosexuality to become mainstream. The decision by the American Psychiatric Association to remove homosexuality from its Diagnostic and Statistical Manual took place in 1973. But homosexual acts were still listed as criminal for an additional 30 years until the Supreme Court in Lawrence v. Texas overturned laws on homosexual sodomy. He then reminds us that even after the ruling, both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton ran as candidates in 2008 opposing same-sex marriage. By contrast, he says, transgenderism took a shorter and much more direct path. Both the speed and intensity have been greater on the transgender issue. We can look at what the Obama administration has threaded in North Carolina when the state legislature offered what most would think would be a reasonable accommodation. We can look to New York City, where the mayor threatens non-conforming businesses and other establishments with huge fines if they do not adjust to the transgender demands. Kevin Williamson shares his own experience when the Chicago Sun-Times reprinted his essay from National Review that raised important questions about surgical attempts to change a person's sexual organs. The firestorm of reaction illustrates one point, but another point comes from the fact that he quoted from Dr. Paul McHugh, who has been critical of sex reassignment surgery. A number of studies show that such surgery often is harmful or produce harmful results. Kevin Williamson wonders, though, if someone like Dr. McHugh would even be allowed to publish such an essay today. This is the result of an aggressive transgender culture war. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Based on the incredible true story and best-selling book from Paramount Pictures and PureFlix comes Same Kind of Different as Me, rated PG-13, in theaters October 20th.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. It's our Friday weekend edition. Michael Berry from First Liberty Institute is with me in studio co-hosting today. And Michael has some news with regard to legislative prayers, because this is one, well, actually, First Liberty Institute has a couple of cases on this very important issue. And it looks like, Michael, that you've got court decisions on both sides, which is, it bodes well for going to the Supreme Court, doesn't it?
Yeah, this is an extremely rare occurrence in the American legal system where people have heard of the proverbial circuit split, which is one of the kind of the hallmarks of a case being likely to be taken by the Supreme Court, is if there's a circuit split, meaning that there's lower federal courts of appeal that have basically reached opposite conclusions on the same or very similar issue. And that's exactly what we have here. And the issue is whether or not the actual, government officers themselves, in this case, their county commissioners, are allowed under the Constitution to open their meetings with a prayer before they go about their business during the meeting. And we have one court in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, that's kind of the mid-Atlantic seaboard region, North Carolina and Virginia and et cetera. They say, no, it's unconstitutional to do that. And then you have the Sixth Circuit, which is not far away, but it's in the Midwest, Ohio, Michigan, that area, saying, well, it is constitutional. So that's why we believe and we're hopeful the Supreme Court will put an end to this controversy of whether or not the fact that you are a lawmaker or a government official, whether you can open your meetings with a prayer.
So you've got Jackson County, Michigan, which is in the Sixth Circuit region. And there, the decision went right for religious liberty.
That's right.
Protecting legislative prayer. And then you've got, which is the case that you had some action on this week, Rowan County, North Carolina. The Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit said, no, you cannot open your meetings with prayer. And so you've got this circuit split. What happened this week?
So this week, in the Rowan County case, so that's the one where they reached the bad result, if you want to call it that, we filed what's called a petition for a writ of certiorari at the U.S. Supreme Court. So that's when you're actually asking the Supreme Court to take the case. And that's, as we just mentioned, we're hopeful that the Supreme Court will see the fact, which, they're obviously very smart and astute. They'll know this, that, well, wait a minute, you've got, the Fourth Circuit says you can't do it, and the Sixth Circuit says you can do it. Our hope is that they say, okay, we need to take this case so we can settle this controversy. So
who is on the other side? Who is actually arguing for the other side?
In the Fourth Circuit case, the one that I just mentioned that we've asked the Supreme Court to take is the ACLU. They actually sued the county back in 2013, arguing that it's unconstitutional to do this. In the Jackson County case, which is in the Sixth Circuit, which was the good case for religious liberty, that's actually being argued by an individual who sued the county on his own because he is a self-avowed pagan who said that he did not want his county commissioners opening in prayer because his county commissioners happened to be Christians and they happened to open their meetings with a Christian prayer, and he didn't like that. It's very possible that this gentleman could have the support of the ACLU, though. Okay.
And so the Supreme Court will decide when? I mean, will they decide during this term of office right now?
It's very, very possible, yes. Very, very possible and likely, in fact, that they will issue a decision as to whether to take this case or not sometime this term.
Okay. Well, now I remember it hasn't been that long. Well, there have been a couple of cases, but one fairly recently in 2014, the town of Greece versus Galloway. This was in New York, where these prayers were protected. Why does not that count in this argument?
That's right. Our listeners probably, if they do recall that case, many are probably saying, well, wait a minute, didn't the Supreme Court just resolve this? So this is where the ACLU is getting kind of clever. The argument is that in town of Greece, so in upstate New York, the town of Greece, New York, they invited a volunteer member of the clergy from the community to open in a prayer. And as I just mentioned, in Rowan County, North Carolina, and in Jackson County, Michigan, the difference is they're not inviting a member of the clergy to do it. The commissioners themselves are doing it. Okay. And the ACLU is saying, oh, well, that's different. That's not what happened in town of Greece because they had a member of the clergy. But I want people to stop and think, say, well, wait a minute. If you can invite a minister to open your meeting in prayer, and that's considered by the Supreme Court to be totally fine under the Constitution, then are we really going to make the argument that a member of the clergy can do it and it's okay, but the lawmaker or government official themselves can't do it? That's to me, that just seems like a ridiculous outcome.
Okay. And, speaking of government speech, in a sense, another very high profile case, and, we talked about President Trump earlier in the program. He's even mentioned this case, the Coach Kennedy case. We love to talk about this because the picture of him kneeling by himself out on the football field and being fired for doing that, just for thanking God for the players in the game silently, and losing his job for that is just, it blows our minds. So just give us the latest update on that case.
Well, the latest is that, we lost at the district court. We lost again at it's very unusual for me to say these words at First Liberty. We lost because we have over a 9% win rate.
The Ninth Circuit.
But it is the Ninth Circuit. Yes, exactly. And we knew that, and Coach Kennedy knew that. So we knew that it was a long shot because of where we were geographically. But we felt that the principles of religious freedom are so important that if we didn't fight this, then who's going to take this fight? Who's going to stand up for religious liberty? So we lost at the district court. We lost at the Ninth Circuit at what's called the panel, right? It's a panel of 3 judges assigned at random. So what we did was we said, well, we need to see if the entire Ninth Circuit, what's called an en banc rehearing, will hear this case, because you might get, some judges who will agree with our position on this case. And in fact, we're pretty confident that we will at least get several on the Ninth Circuit who realize, this is a horrible outcome for religious liberty. And without beating a dead horse here, just it's because of how bad the panel decision was. It was such an extreme decision. They said that if you're a public employee, so if you're a school teacher, a coach, any public employee for that matter, and you do something religious, you engage in religious conduct or expression, and it can be seen by somebody in the public, that you can be fired for that. So imagine a Catholic school teacher at a public school sits down at her meal, says grace, and crosses herself before eating her meal, and somebody can see it, the school can fire her for that. A Jewish coach who happens to wear a yarmulke because that's what their religious observance teaches can be fired for that as long as people in the public can see it. That's how outrageous that Ninth Circuit decision was.
So we heard President Trump talking about religious liberty at the Values Voters Summit. And so that country that he's talking about and the country where you can get a decision from a high-level court, to me, it isn't even the same country in a sense. It's sort of cognitive dissonance. So, I mean, we have really the Constitution on our side, those of us who would like to see our religious liberties restored. But it has to be restored in a sense. I mean, we have to work hard to do this. That's why you exist, correct?
That's right. I mean, you've got very powerful, well-funded, well-organized, groups across the country who, for all intents and purposes, are trying to change what the Constitution means. And you will hear them in academic circles talking about we have a living Constitution. Mm-hmm. And when they say that, it sounds nice, but what they're actually meaning is the Constitution can change and evolve to mean whatever we think it should mean. And if our values and our norms and our moral principles change over time, as we've definitely observed them doing in our society, then we think that our Constitution should change to match that. The problem is, if that's what was intended, then that's the way that people who wrote the Constitution would have written it. But they didn't write it that way. They said, if you want to change this document, there's a way to do that. But we're going to make it really hard to do it because you have to really, really, really want to change this document if you're going to.
And others have to agree with you.
Exactly. You have to have a large consensus of the population to agree with you to change it. But what you have, that, again, like I said, is very powerful, very well-funded organizations and groups out there who says, yeah, that's really hard to change the Constitution through the way that the Constitution says to change it. We're just going to do it through the courts, or we're going to do it through who we elect to be president.
That's why it's so important who our judges are, and that's going to be our next topic here on Point of View. After the break, we're going to talk about the confirmation of judges, because the courts were began to move in a very leftist direction under President Obama. He was able to appoint and have confirmed many people. But at the end, the Republicans were able to kind of slow that down a little bit. So there are a lot of openings and vacancies. Good opportunity for this president and this Senate to get some good people on the courts. But it's kind of bogged down in the Senate. So we're going to talk about a change in rules that could speed things up. Go to pointofview.net if you'd like to read more about First Liberty's activities. Mike's picture is there, and you can go directly through to the website to see all. It's a great website. You can learn a lot by going to the First Liberty website, and you can do it by going to pointofview.net. Stay with us. We've got a lot more right after this.
Sometimes I joke that I'll win the lottery when God blows the winning ticket across a parking lot to me. I don't buy tickets, so if he wants me to win, that's the way. Pretty silly, right? But a lot of us take a similar stance when it comes to the ills of our culture. We don't do anything. We simply hope things will change. I encourage you to get in the game and make things change. Join Truth Team 360 and be part of a work that changes lives and communities. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.
From Paramount Pictures and PureFlix comes Same Kind of Different as Me. Ron and Debbie Hall have everything they could ever want, except for a loving marriage. But when Debbie befriends a homeless man, their lives begin to intersect, and they are all changed forever.
Amazing how far a little tender love and care can go.
Same Kind of Different as Me, based on the true story. In theaters October 20th, rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. More information is available at samekindofdifferentasmemovie.com.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
And Michael Berry from First Liberty Institute. And this is just interesting, sort of this development that's happened in the Senate confirmation wars this week. As Donald Trump is announcing more and more wonderful nominees, they're piling up in the Senate. Part of the problem is this one policy. It's not a law, but it's a rule. It's called blue slips. It asks the two senators from a nominee's home state for their opinion on that nominee before the committee holds a hearing or further evaluates the nominee. They can say, I object or I approve on a blue slip of paper. That's why it's called a blue slip. And one senator in particular from Minnesota, Al Franken, has been abusing this. It's not supposed to be, Michael, because of the conservatism or liberalism or political leanings of the judge. Or religious
beliefs.
Yeah, or religious beliefs. It's supposed to be because, if you object because of something really egregious about that person and their personality or their history, their record in the state, something you would know as a senator that nobody else perhaps would know or the other senators wouldn't. But that's not what's been happening, and it's come to the point where that blue slip process, a lot of people were saying it had to go, and it's going, correct?
Yeah, so to back up a little bit, a lot of this has to deal with the fact that there is so much anger within the Democratic Party that President Trump was elected to begin with, and number two, that he now has the opportunity to really reshape the judiciary. When he was elected, there was just over 100 judicial vacancies. That's now up to approximately 150, and experts are predicting that with upcoming likely resignations, it can even get up to about 165, possibly 170. So that's 170 judges that President Trump has the opportunity or the potential opportunity to nominate. And so what's happened is you've gone from the historical and traditional practice, as you pointed out, Penna, of senators, like you said, if they felt that a particular nominee was unqualified to be a judge based on professional qualifications, or maybe they were arrested, for a DUI or something that wasn't disclosed, and that came to light, or something like that, then that would be potentially disqualifying in terms of that's not the type of person we want as a judge, and they could return the blue slip and say, I would not vote for this person to confirm them. It's now become, there's an R next to their name, and therefore they're not qualified to be a judge. Or, as we've seen recently, they are a Catholic, and they believe in Catholic teaching and doctrine, so they're not qualified to be a judge. Or they're an evangelical Christian, and they've talked about that in public, so they're not qualified to be a judge, which is ridiculous and unconstitutional. And as Senator McConnell, who's really led the effort to kind of again, the blue slip process is not written into the Constitution. It's a historic practice. It's just a tradition that's gone on. And he's basically, what's going on is he's saying, look, I'm not going to allow you to use the blue slips as a way to be an obstructionist anymore. Now it's just a formality where you're just telling me this is how I'm probably going to vote on this particular person, but it doesn't actually carry any weight anymore. And so it's unfortunate that it's had to come to that. But before everybody jumps on Senator McConnell and blames him for this, it was actually the Democrats. They were warned. If you continue down this path of basically playing partisan games with judicial nominees, then we're going to remove the blue slip rule. And that's exactly where we are now.
Yeah, and that's happened. Okay, here's the quote from Senator McConnell. The majority, that is Republicans, will treat a blue slip as simply notification of how you're going to vote, not as an opportunity to blackball. And that's where we are. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd love to hear from you on this. What are your thoughts on this? Should they have gotten rid of this blue slip process? Is it about time? Our number is 800-351-1212, and we'd love to hear from you. We've put, because this can be a little complex, we've put an article up by Guy Benson from Town Hall Hardball. McConnell changes rule to overcome obstruction of Trump's judicial picks. the Dems fume. And Dianne Feinstein, who is the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate, was very upset. She said Republicans in Congress are about to give Trump even more power. And that's her assessment of it. But we do want to talk about this with you. Michael Berry is here to discuss it. Also, the things that President Trump said about religious liberty. Did you hear that? What do you think about it? And a little bit later, we're going to talk about the Boy Scouts now allowing girls. That's another
sure, nobody has comments about that.
I'm sure. Again, the number is 800-351-1212. And we try to put stories, as you know, up about all the different things we talk about, and we've done that today. So you can go and find out about the Rowan County case. We've posted that. We've also posted Guy Benson's article about the blue slips, and we're going to talk about Obamacare a little bit later and the Boy Scouts. So that's what's going on here at Point of View. And let me just open up the phones formally, 800-351-1212. What do you foresee, Mike Berry, now that this rule has changed? I don't think we have any big recesses of the Senate coming up too soon. Do you think there'll be a lot of nominees approved?
I certainly hope so. Otherwise, what's all the commotion and the yelling and screaming for? So yes, there's a backlog right now, not just of judicial nominees being confirmed, but just presidential appointments within the government. There are many positions in the federal government that need people to fill them. And those people need to be confirmed, because if they're not confirmed, guess what? It's the person who was there under Obama is still there performing that function. So there is, people talk about something called the deep state and things like that. The fact of the matter is that as we speak right now, there are hundreds, if not even thousands, of quote unquote Obama holdovers that are continuing to perform their duties for the federal government because there is no new, there hasn't been a confirmation of the new presidential appointment in that position, and there's no way of knowing whether those people, there's no guarantee that they're loyal to President Trump. I mean, they were appointed by President Obama.
They're probably not.
Right. So
let me ask you, I mean, we had the announcement in the last couple of weeks about the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Tom Price. He retired, he basically resigned, and it had to do with flights and things like that. So HHS is an important department for people who care about moral values in the country, the codification of sin, pro-life, marriage and sex, abstinence teaching in schools and things like that. So those are all very important to, I think, our listeners. And yet we don't have an HHS director right now. I think there's an acting one. Do you know anything about what's going on to get Tom Price replaced? Will some of the good things that have happened at HHS, will they continue? Do you have any insight into that?
Well, I don't have any insight into who the new nominee for HHS secretary might be, but in terms of the things that are happening within HHS, we talked about the DOJ religious liberty memo that came out. Well, there's also the HHS memo that came out on the same day that, again, addressed the issue that was raised in the Little Sisters of the Poor. And for listeners who maybe think, well, how does that affect me, or why is that a big deal? I just want people to realize that the United States is currently one of only 7 nations in the world that allows elective abortions after the 20th week of pregnancy. And those seven nations are not necessarily who you'd think. People think, oh yeah, it's probably Norway and Sweden and Denmark and all those very progressive. No, we're talking nations like Vietnam, China, and North Korea. That's who we're keeping company with right now. And so it's to me, it's just mind-boggling that the United States is one of only 7 nations that allows that. And that's what the type of work that HHS does, is to try to reverse that course from a culture of death, which is really what it is, into a culture of life in this country.
We know a lot of people that were actually appointed by Tom Price to be in HHS. They're still there, so that's good news. I will say that if you are listening online, or if you want to go to pointofview.net, you can hear my commentary, which I did this week. It's on the fetal pain bill. And the House of Representatives, for the 3rd time, has passed a bill that bans abortions after 20 weeks, these dismemberment type abortions where it's so painful for the fetus. And now science really shows us that the baby can feel pain. So that's kind of a good way to show a picture to the American public that these abortions at this late stage are so brutal and they should be banned. Now this is going to be before the Senate, and the Senate's going to have to decide whether they're going to pass it too, so that it can be sent to President Trump, who has promised he will sign it. So this is another way of reducing the number of abortions and getting us out of that brutal club of North Korea and Vietnam and others who are the only countries that are allowing this at the late stage of pregnancy. So, I just want to recommend my commentary if you want to go to pointofview.net and hear it or read it. And we will continue to discuss all these issues of religious liberty after the break, and we're going to add one. The Boy Scouts, they're going to allow girls in. What do you think about it? 800-351-1212. We'll be back after these messages. Stay with us here at Point of View. There's not an American who doesn't decry the shocking Las Vegas murders, but we as a nation turn our backs on the torture of unborn babies. In recent days, the House of Representatives voted to curtail late-term abortions by passing the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. This law makes it a crime to perform most abortions after the 20-week mark in a pregnancy. Abortionists violating this law could face 5 years in prison. The House has passed pain-capable acts before, always under the threat of a presidential veto. The bill now awaits action in the Senate, having been introduced by South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham. The president is ready and willing to sign it. Most abortions at this stage are performed by dismemberment and decapitation. The baby is torn limb from limb. The abortionist goes in blind and pulls parts out. Watch a sonogram of this and you'll see the baby recoil, attempting to avoid the abortionist's clamp. There's a wealth of medical evidence showing that at 20 weeks, 5 months gestation, an unborn baby can feel pain. By 20 weeks, nerve endings have spread to all parts of the developing child's skin. One doctor, a professor of neurobiology and pediatrics, testified in a House hearing that the unborn child is capable of reacting to pain at 8 to 10 weeks gestation. We go all out to see that 22-week-old preemies survive, and yet we allow babies roughly that age to be torn apart in the womb. Tony Perkins of Family Research Council says this pain-capable bill conforms federal abortion law to modern science. Vulnerable Democrat senators in red states need to do some soul-searching. Will they stand with their constituents or vote with their party? Democrat votes are needed to overcome the inevitable filibuster and make up for a couple of Republicans who historically yield to the abortion lobby. We are one of only 7 nations who allow this inhumane treatment of unborn children. We must drop out of that brutal club. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. Michael Berry from First Liberty Institute, also in studio. It's your Friday weekend edition. And another piece of news today. Actually, this week, the Boy Scouts of America said it would welcome girls into its ranks. The Wall Street Journal says this is a move that could help the organization boost its numbers in the face of dwindling memberships. The Boy Scouts determined that busy families want just one organization for both boys and girls. Really? The group also says it has 2.3 million youth members today. It's down from more than 11% from 2.6 million in 2012 and down a third since 2000. So they're trying to beef up their numbers. They're going to start a program for older girls to become Eagle Scouts. At first, it seems like the Scouts have finally surrendered in the culture war, says the Wall Street Journal, but the reality is more complicated, and they're talking about membership. But the Boy Scouts has been making decisions over the past decade or so. They allowed homosexuals, and it was a big fight. After them standing very strong against it, even going to the Supreme Court, they ended up a few years ago capitulating. Then now they allow leaders to be homosexual also. And then just this last year, they've opened it up to transgender scouts. So, Michael, do you think it's membership related? I think maybe the loss in membership has to do with some of those other decisions.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's sad that, pick your metaphor, whether the Boy Scouts are the ostrich with its head in the sand or they're ignoring the elephant in the room. The truth is they've fallen away from what their original mission and values were, and they're now suffering the consequences of that in the marketplace, so to speak. And to say that this is because American families are busy and want to have just one organization, well, I'm sorry, but American families have always been busy. They were busy back, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s when the Boy Scouts were going strong. And the truth is, I think it is that because their membership numbers have been dwindling, and that's been no secret, but again, I think the Boy Scouts have been kind of ignoring that to their peril. Now they're scrambling to figure out a way to boost their enrollment and their membership numbers. And this is, to them, the only feasible way to do that. When really just, those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. Just look back at your history when you were a strong organization, a strong, vibrant, healthy organization that was well respected across the country on both sides of the political aisle, so to speak. It's because you were true to who your character, your mission, and your core values were. And let this be a lesson to any organization out there. When you get away from what you truly are and what your identity is, and I really hate to bring this into it, but just use the NFL as an example, right? If you get away from what you're really there for, people are going to stop paying attention to you. And that's exactly what's happening to the Boy Scouts, and possibly, we've seen NFL's viewership numbers dwindling too. And I hope the NFL takes a page from this, lesson and says, well, wait a minute, maybe we should just get back to playing football and, being kind of an all-American institution as opposed to getting involved in the culture wars.
It is interesting that this news from the Boy Scouts comes right when we're in the middle of the NFL flap. And I do think that the correlation you've made, Michael, is astute. I'd love to hear from you folks. If you are a Boy Scout, if you're an Eagle Scout, I'd love to hear from you. What do you think of this? If you've had kids in the Boy Scout organization, or if you just have a comment on this, do you think this is because of busy families and just trying to beef up their numbers, or do you think there's something else at play here? It's interesting that the National Organization for Women, Michael, actually, they were in support of this. They pushed the Boy Scouts to do this, and yet they've got their own Girl Scouts. This is going to hurt the Girl Scouts, obviously.
Well, the Girl Scouts were the most opposed to it, so that should tell you something right there.
Yeah, and of course the Girl Scouts, we've got to say, they beat the Boy Scouts at going politically correct. They went politically correct well before the Boy Scouts did. When we were praising the Boy Scouts back in the early 2000s for going to the Supreme Court and keeping, some common sense, moral values, virtue in the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts were going left, and they were bringing Planned Parenthood in to teach girls, and they were kind of towing the feminist line. So the Girl Scouts did that. They lost members. But now, it's like Boy Scouts are saying there's this big demand for the Boy Scouts to bring girls in. And here's another part of it. Because to make leadership skills available to girls is another reason that you're hearing. Well, the Girl Scouts are not trying to do that. It almost says that only men and male leaders can help girls become leaders. That is such an anti-feminist message.
Yep.
That this is all, in a sense, makes no sense, except when you look at it in the light of we've just lost our way with regard to teaching virtue in the country. It's too bad.
It is. And I don't mean to be a harsh critic of the Boy Scouts. I have family members who are Eagle Scouts. 2 of my closest friends are Eagle Scouts. I think that is a tremendous honor and accomplishment for anybody to achieve the title of Eagle Scout. And it's just sad to see that they're cheapening the value and prestige of that name, Eagle Scout, now. And it's not being cheapened or devalued by virtue of the fact that because a girl or a female can have that title. It's because they are, again, they're ignoring their own identity and their own character and who they are. And any organization that does that is cheapening the value of whatever good or service that it provides.
Yeah, something that makes me sad about it, I think, and I've got a cousin who's an Eagle Scout, and of course there's so many people who are in leadership positions. I mean, I think of the governor of Texas, the former governor, Rick Perry. He wrote a book about the Boy Scouts back when the early fights in the early 2000s were going on, and he was in our studio, and we talked about the book, and it was just fun to see, his praise of the Boy Scouts. And I've got a friend who's very active in Boy Scout leadership in our area, and she raised 2 boys. Both of them became Eagle Scouts. And by the way, if you've got kids who were Eagle Scouts or are working toward that, that's the parents play a big part in that. You have to get your kids, the nagging mother, you got to get, do this little task that you've got to do to meet your requirements. And the moms are a big part of that. And they've been certainly driving their kids to all their Boy Scouts meetings. Many are leaders and dens and all of that. And so, a lot goes to the parents, and I think it's just a big loss for the country. We are taking your calls on this. I said I wanted to hear from Eagle Scouts and just parents who've been involved or people who are involved in the Boy Scouts and anyone that really has a thought on this. Let's go now to South Carolina and speak with Pat. Hi, Pat. You're on Point of View.
Hi. I was just saying, I think that I did not have a Boy Scout. I don't have an Eagle Scout, but I know that when I was a young girl and I was in the Girl Scouts, there were activities we were involved in, but the Boy Scouts offered so many more activities that were fun. And I was a kid. I felt like they were things that I would have enjoyed. And I think maybe the Girl Scouts, if they would revamp their program and offer some things to these girls who, when
was it the outdoor
up,
activities that you wished that you had more of in the Girl Scouts?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, I've heard people say that, but I think the answer or the response is, okay, let's add some of this to the Girl Scouts. Let's improve the Girl Scouts, but don't make the Boy Scouts change.
Right. I mean, yes.
Okay.
I think offer some of these same activities to the girls, the camping, cooking out, and learning how to start a fire, things like this. Let them learn some life skills.
Thank you for the call, Pat. We really appreciate it. We're up on a break. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to hear from you, 800-351-1212. What do you think about this change in the Boy Scouts? It's interesting. They're not going to change their name. They're going to allow girls, but they're still going to call themselves the Boy Scouts of America. We are taking your calls. This is Point of View, your weekend edition. Go to our website and check it out during the break, and we'll be right back.
At dinner recently, I was struck by the couple in front of me. They were allegedly spending a night out together, but the only time they communicated in a half hour was one time when the man showed what was on his phone to the woman, and then back to their own screens. We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You'll find us online with your phone, your tablet, your laptop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues. You can also follow our new YouTube video series, Uncensored. Stay informed. Follow us on Twitter, at Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Again, at Point of View RTS. We'd love you to retweet us, to share our Facebook posts, but please don't do it when you're out with your family or someone you love. We can wait. We're online 24 hours a day. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you for staying with us for the second hour of Point of View. This is your weekend edition. Michael Berry, Deputy General Counsel at First Liberty Institute, is my co-host. I'm Penna Dexter. And Mike, started sort of our conversation about the Boy Scouts. There are a lot of different sort of rationales. It was a unanimous vote by the board of the Boy Scouts, opening up to girls, discussion of leadership and the provision of this teaching of leadership to girls, discussions of the Boy Scouts losing membership, and maybe this is a way to increase membership. Others have said that maybe it's actually the end of the Boy Scouts. At the Resurgent, Russell Patton said this is just the final nail in the coffin for the Boy Scouts. Do you think that's true? We are taking your calls. Do you think it is, Michael? Do you think that, it's just kind of the next step in the politically correct slippery slope of the Boy Scouts?
I mean, I don't think it's the end of the Boy Scouts as we know it. I think that what it means is that the character of the Boy Scouts as we have known them is going to change, or is changing, and has changed. So, to quote from the old commercial, this isn't your father's Boy Scouts, or it's not even the Boy Scouts that I knew when I was a kid. I mean, I was not in the Boy Scouts, but I certainly had a lot of friends who were, and there were times when I looked at them with envy at the things that they got to do, and the character that it was building in them. The mere fact that an organization is that an all-male organization is decided to allow women does not mean that they're going to be of lesser character by any means. I mean, just being a co-ed organization does not necessarily. I mean, it's not a negative thing, and so that's not what I'm implying. What I'm implying is that anytime, as I've said, an organization has an identity and a mission, and that, in this case, in the case of the Boy Scouts, has been tied to identity as boys and young men, and you move away from that, that is the danger, is moving away from who your true identity and who your true self is.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. And there was a sort of a term, virtue, that in some senses we're losing the definition of in the country. And so when the Boy Scouts was created to instruct boys in how to become, quote unquote, virtuous men, I mean, a virtuous man and a virtuous woman, yes, virtue is something that can describe both men and women, but there are certain qualities that are taught to men that are different than the qualities taught to women, and that's not a very politically correct statement, but it has served the culture well. And men and women are different, and I think we've tried to blur those differences. I will say that the Boy Scouts have had groups that have been open to women already. They had the Venturing Group and the Sea Scouting Group. These have been open to women. And now, though, the Cub Scouts, it's going to be, the dens will still be single sex, but the packs can decide whether to be mixed or single gender. It will be up to the local packs. And then girls who want to become Eagle Scouts will do so in a program that's designed specifically for girls. So there's still some separation. One critic of this at the Resurgent, who said it was the end of the Boy Scouts, Russell Patton, I mean, he said, incredibly, I have to wonder why any parent would want their young teenage girls camping in the woods with young teenage boys. Who exactly is okay with this? I mean, I think it remains to be seen whether that's what will really happen. Are they going to have co-ed camping trips? I mean, we've been upset about that with regard to the homosexuality issue because that's a little harder to separate people. But in the girl and boy issue, let's just hope they don't put them in tents together.
Well, I mean, that's true, but at this point, there's no reason to think that they won't move in that direction in the future. I mean, what is to stop them from moving in that direction simply because, in their own words, well, there's a lot of people who are saying that this is, more convenient and it's just logistically, it's a lot harder to keep everybody segregated and separated, and we don't like the word segregated anyway because it has historical, and just, and on you go.
Yeah. Let's take some calls, see what folks think. I'm going to go first to North Carolina where Will is. He's an Eagle Scout. Hi, Will.
Hey, how are y'all doing? Thanks
Great.
for taking my call. So I was very active in Scouts from the age of 11 to 17. I got my Eagle Scout at age 16. And when I was involved, Scouting did not allow girls, did not allow openly gay Scouts or Scoutmasters or transgender Scouts. And I could not be prouder of the direction the Boy Scouts is moving to include transgender kids, gay Scoutmasters, and now open the experience up to girls. There was not a single skill or leadership ability or character development that I learned or that applied to me that could not also apply to girls or to transgender kids or gay kids. And so I don't think it's a matter of being politically correct or engaging in the culture wars. I think it's a matter of opening up Scouting and the values of Scouting to as many young people as possible and no longer discriminating on those bases. And for the first time in many, many years, I'm very, very proud of the direction that the Boy Scouts are moving.
So why call it the Boy Scouts? It's the Boy Scouts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the traditional name of the organization. I don't really have a problem semantically if they want to keep the name for tradition's sake or change the name to Scouts of America. I think that's a semantic debate predominantly, and I don't think it's critical whether they call it Boy Scouts of America or Scouts of America.
Yeah, well, they're still calling it Boy Scouts.
I think you bring up a valid point, though, that the values that the Boy Scouts have historically and traditionally instilled in young people are worthy values, right? Those are things that we want to see in young people. I absolutely agree with that. I guess the only issue I take with that is that does that then presume that the Boy Scouts are the only organization in existence that is able to do that? And if that's the case, if the Boy Scouts are the only organization that can do that, then maybe it makes sense to say, well, gosh, these are the only ones that can instill these values, so we want more people to have these values. But I don't believe it's true that the Boy Scouts are the only organization out there that instills those values.
I would agree with that. I don't think the Boy Scouts presume to be the only organization that can instill those values. An analogy that I would give you is different denominations of churches, right? Methodists, Presbyterians, Baptists don't presume that they're the only individual type of denomination that can instill the values of Christianity. They do so in their own way and on an individual basis. But Methodists aren't criticizing Baptists for trying to instill basically the same set of values. And in that same way, I think the Boy Scouts can try to instill all of these values in young people without saying we're the only organization that can do this or we can do this exclusively. We just want to be open to as many young people as possible and to helping their development. I don't think exclusivity is really an issue in this debate.
Since you're an Eagle Scout, I just have one more question, and then I know people are going to call in and react to your position on this. But was there anything good? Well, actually, I've got to hold you over. Would you mind sticking with us? Because I want to ask, was there anything good about it being just with boys? Did you get any enjoyment out of that part of the character of the Boy Scouts? We'll answer that after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You may have noticed that the contentious issues in the culture war seem to be coming faster and with more intensity. In a recent commentary, Kevin Williamson validates that observation. He begins by reminding us how long it took for homosexuality to become mainstream. The decision by the American Psychiatric Association to remove homosexuality from its diagnostic and statistical manual took place in 1973. But homosexual acts were still listed as criminal for an additional 30 years until the Supreme Court in Lawrence v. Texas overturned laws on homosexual sodomy. He then reminds us that even after the ruling, both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton ran as candidates in 2008 opposing same-sex marriage. By contrast, he says, transgenderism took a shorter and much more direct path. Both the speed and intensity have been greater on the transgender issue. We can look at what the Obama administration has threaded in North Carolina when the state legislature offered what most would think would be a reasonable accommodation. We can look to New York City, where the mayor threatens non-conforming businesses and other establishments with huge fines if they do not adjust to the transgender demands. Kevin Williamson shares his own experience when the Chicago Sun-Times reprinted his essay from National Review that raised important questions about surgical attempts to change a person's sexual organs. The firestorm of reaction illustrates one point, but another point comes from the fact that he quoted from Dr. Paul McHugh, who has been critical of sex reassignment surgery. A number of studies show that such surgery often is harmful or produce harmful results. Kevin Williamson wonders, though, if someone like Dr. McHugh would even be allowed to publish such an essay today. This is the result of an aggressive transgender culture war. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Based on the incredible true story and best-selling book from Paramount Pictures and PureFlix comes Same Kind of Different as Me, rated PG-13, in theaters October 20th.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. We've asked Will from North Carolina to stay with us because he's an Eagle Scout. And Will, are you still there?
I am.
I just wanted you to go ahead and sort of answer the question. Did you derive any benefit from having the Boy Scouts under the previous definition as just boys? Did that help your enjoyment of it?
It's hard for me to say because I didn't have a comparative experience of having scouts with girls. I will say that I learned a lot from scouts who were older than me, who could teach me the skills, who'd had the experience, and because of the nature of the Boy Scouts at that time, they were all male, and so maybe as an 11-year-old, a 12-year-old, it was easier for me to accept a subordinate role to other males who had leadership positions within the troop. But maybe that was a problem with my perspective as 11 or 12-year-old. I mean, I think 11 or 12-year-old kids could accept that role with female leadership as well. So that's a very difficult question to answer insofar as I only had the experience with boys in the troop.
Okay, well, I appreciate your calling in and giving your perspective. And Mike, in a sense, he's applauding this development, and, he's got the perfect right to do that. I just beg to disagree. I'm so sad about this, and I do feel like it was inevitable in a sense, but I think that it's hard to call the Boy Scouts now that they're open, and that it's really not a positive here.
Yeah, I mean, Will, as an Eagle Scout, certainly has probably more right than most of us to voice his opinion on this, and I absolutely respect that. I just I do think that the argument that because the Boy Scouts provide and teach so many great values that why wouldn't we want more people to do that? To me, I think of if I, hypothetically, if I were an atheist and I saw a church in my neighborhood that was doing a lot of great things in the community, and I thought, well, gee, I want to be a part of that. I want to have a sense of community and belonging and to help the poor and the needy and to have that sense of belonging. So I'm, gosh, and that I'm going to call myself an atheist Christian, and then the church saying, well, yeah, absolutely, you can, sure, come on, you can join us as an atheist Christian. People would look at me and laugh and say, well, those, it's incompatible, because now you're removing the meaning, any meaning of the word, what the word Christian means, right? Because if you're an atheist and you don't believe in God, but you're claiming to be a Christian, which requires the belief in God, and I'm obviously over exaggerating for the purposes of this analogy, but it just seems, again, I go back to, what is the purpose for the Boy Scouts to exist in the first place? Why were they even created? And if you want to change that, then change the mission and the identity of the Boy Scouts but don't do it kind of in the reverse order.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's so much room for organizations that changing the meaning of the Boy Scouts is really sad. I think it was done a long time ago, though, in a sense. Let's go to another Eagle Scout. Excuse me, Jerry in South Carolina, listening in on WAGP. Hi, Jerry. Thank you for calling.
Hey, how are y'all doing?
Great.
Glad you're addressing this.
What did you think when it was announced? Were you surprised?
It was almost as bad as 2012 when the professional scouters snatched defeat from the jaws of victory with the homosexual scout issue.
Yeah, I mean, they wanted the Supreme Court.
Right. They just snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. They had it, and they didn't want it. I've talked to people since then, professionals who lauded it and said, this is just great, and I had to disagree with them. I said, you're wrong on so many levels. I will say this. I've had a little bit of experience of both genders within scouting, because when I went to the 1976 World Jamboree in Scandinavia, it turns out that America is the only scouting organization that had separate boy and girl scouts. And so there were girls in the other troops, and I didn't have a lot of experience with that, but I know that we're unique in separating the genders. We're also one of the most godly nations on earth, in my opinion. And I see loads of advantages of not confusing when the boys hit 15, 16, 17, and you start moving to explorers and things. Scouting has for a long time included girls in the Explorer program. And there's heavy adult supervision. It's not letting anything happen. But when they're younger, the boys need to be separate from the girls. Just we develop in different ways, and they need to be able to focus on character development, skill development, development of becoming a young man surrounded by exemplary characters of men, because most scoutmasters, assistant scoutmasters, are just fantastic people. And getting girls in there just confuses everything, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there's something about little boys and boys going through puberty that I think there's a freedom that they have when they can be just with boys that helps them.
Amen.
Yeah. And then, then they go back to the situations where they are with girls. But, I think it takes something away from their experience in a sense. I appreciate your giving your
I'm going to be pushing Trail Life. It's an alternative Christian program that got started in 2012-13 when scouting chose to turn away from the Baden-Powell model of scouting and to this abomination that they're approaching now.
We've
and
had
I'm going to speak to my church again.
We had the leader. We had John Stemberger, who was in on the development of Trail Life on the program many times during that period as the Boy Scouts were going through their bad decision-making process back then. And it's time to have them on again because I want to see and sort of expose how well they've developed and what they're offering for people. Thanks for bringing that up, Jerry, and for your thoughts today.
Thank you. You're doing a great service. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And we've got another Eagle Scout waiting on the line. Let's go to Harry in Texas. Hi, Harry. Thanks for calling.
Hi, Penna. I'm really enjoying the show today. I'm just in shock, I guess, here in Texas. I had all daughters, so I'm an Eagle Scout, class of 1973, and was blessed to have 3 daughters. My wife was a Girl Scout leader for about 10 years. I was very active helping her. At the time, they called us doodads. I mean, we just pitched in and helped, mainly driving on camping trips and things like that. But finally, in around 2000 or so, I got in a situation career-wise that I was able to devote time to be a scoutmaster of a troop here in Texas, and a Boy Scout troop, and we were privileged to help several boys work toward the Eagle Scout goal and rank, and they achieved that. But when I talked to parents as young boys were joining the troop, they would mention Eagle Scout quite a lot, and I would say, well, Eagle Scout's a great thing, but it does take an awful lot of work. But my goal is to get each boy to the first class rank, because the early ranks in scouting are all about character traits and the basic outdoor skills. And if I can help a young boy get to first class scout, that's great. Beyond
what are the
that,
character traits? What are like the couple of the top character traits you teach?
Well, I'll just tell you the scout law: trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. And of course, you can expand every one of those, and all the things that kids work through in those early ranks is just building on all that. And of course, the motto, Scout motto, they pledge to God and country, and it's a very patriotic organization, and that was my goal, and I was always so pleased, almost more pleased when a boy reached first class than when they reached Eagle Scout, because Eagle Scout from after first class, they're largely on their own, seeking all kinds of different merit badges, and that's great because it helps young men become self-starters. It helps them with goal setting, helps them learn a lot of new skills. It helps them find a career, maybe. I mean, I was a forester for 30 years before I retired a year or two ago, and I became a forester largely because of my experience in Scouts.
Harry, thank you for your testimony. I've got to go to a break, and so I really appreciate this. It's so great to get the Eagle Scouts. We've got some more waiting to talk to us, Mike. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to a break. At this break, you can go to pointofview.net. You can check out the piece we've put up there from the Daily Caller about this development in the Boy Scouts. And we do continue to take your calls at 800-351-1212. If you do go to our website, there's a donate button at the upper right-hand corner. That would also be appreciated if you would participate financially with this ministry. We are a listener-supported ministry. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Sometimes I joke that I'll win the lottery when God blows the winning ticket across a parking lot to me. I don't buy tickets, so if he wants me to win, that's the way. Pretty silly, right? But a lot of us take a similar stance when it comes to the ills of our culture. We don't do anything. We simply hope things will change. I encourage you to get in the game and make things change. Join Truth Team 360 and be part of a work that changes lives and communities. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.
From Paramount Pictures and PureFlix comes Same Kind of Different as Me. Ron and Debbie Hall have everything they could ever want, except for a loving marriage. But when Debbie befriends a homeless man, their lives begin to intersect, and they are all changed forever.
Amazing how far a little tender loving care can go.
Same Kind of Different as Me, based on the true story. In theaters October 20th, rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. More information is available at samekindofdifferentasmemovie.com.
Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
And Michael Berry, Deputy General Counsel at First Liberty Institute. And we are discussing, well, we've basically been on the topic of the Boy Scouts. It's getting a great response. So we're going to continue discussing that and taking your calls at 800-351-1212. And I did plan on discussing this order that President Trump issued with regard to Obamacare. And there's a piece in the Wall Street Journal that we've posted that you can read. I don't know if we're going to get to it today, but this order could begin to really reverse the insurance, revive the insurance markets to make it more free market. America may start to have more choices at lower cost for health care. And since the Congress did not really repeal Obamacare, it didn't repeal Obamacare, and didn't really accomplish any kind of rollback, President Trump has issued this executive order. There are lots of, there are actually about 3 basic pieces to it. But, you know, as I was reading about it in various articles, it just sort of to allow me to understand that this could actually be opened up and changed. If the Congress won't do it, the president and the White House may do some of that. And that will be something to get into in the future here at Point of View. But I want to go back to the phones. We've got so many people wanting to participate in the program today. Let's go to Raven listening in from South Carolina. Hi, Raven. Thanks for calling.
Hey, you're welcome. You're welcome. I just kind of wanted to put in a couple of thoughts. I grew up in the Brownie and Girl Scout program, and as I was growing up, the activities, you know, I never really thought about what the Boy Scouts were doing because we had our own thing going on. And in retrospect, growing up and kind of growing out of that, we did a lot of the same things. So a couple of my thoughts are, you know, we did a lot of the same things. We went out in the woods. We tied knots. We did a lot of the conservation programs, earned badges, and all that fun stuff. The one lemming thought that I have is, as I've continued, you know, to kind of check in with things back home, the cadet program, the older Girl Scout program, I don't hear of anybody doing that. And so my thought is, you know, maybe if more females, more moms, more women kind of got more involved in fostering the continuation of the program, maybe the females that are looking for that leadership and kind of are more prone to want to be the outdoorsy kind of gal, maybe they wouldn't have to go to the male side of it. So that was just kind of a thought I had.
That's a good point. You know, I was a Brownie and a Girl Scout, and then when it came to cadets, that's when I quit. I wasn't the most outdoorsy kid, though. I was kind of a bookworm. And so perhaps, you know, for me, and maybe there are more girls like me than, you know, and boys, most boys like the outdoors. And for girls, maybe it's not quite the same. But I really think today that more outdoor programs are attractive to girls. I think girls would love that, and whatever organization that is that does that, I think girls will flock to it. So I think your point is great. Thank you for calling.
Awesome. Oh, you're welcome. Have a blessed day.
You too. Let's take another call, Michael. Let's go to Orban in Texas. Hi, Orban.
Hi, Penna. Thank you for taking my call. My dad was a scoutmaster. He was an Eagle. I'm an Eagle. I was a scoutmaster from here to Alaska and back.
Wow.
And I cannot figure out why they want to do this unless it's just to pervert everything that's good and right. I don't know the reasoning. Have you heard?
Well, we've heard a lot of reasons, haven't we, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, their official reason that they're giving to the public is that for a lot of families, it's more convenient, you know, especially families who may have young boys and young girls in their family. It's a lot easier for them to just have one organization that everybody can be a part of at the same time. I think if you just look at the numbers and follow the proverbial money trail, you'll see that I think what this is really about is the Boy Scouts' numbers have been dwindling rapidly since, you could probably trace it to 2012. And this is a way that they see of being able to bolster their numbers.
I believe that thoroughly. I think that's the big reason. And initially, well, like we all know, it never had to change except for the top executives, and we didn't get a fair vote. They they wanted to do it, and they're doing it again. They're just breaking something that works.
Yeah. Thanks, Orban. We appreciate your call. It's really valuable to hear from the Eagles because they've gone through a lot. It's been a big part of their growing up and a big part of their life. And so to hear their thoughts on it on both sides is good. Mike, we mentioned that the Boy Scouts sort of gave up something that they fought hard for, and that was the Dale versus Boy Scout case that started in the 90s and ended up being decided in favor of the Boy Scouts remaining a single sex and an organization not allowing homosexuals to openly, join as homosexuals and be leaders. And that's all changed. And it didn't have to be that way. It was, as our caller just said, it was a decision from the top.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you want to take the Boy Scouts of America versus Dale decision and boil it down to what it really means, it means that a private organization such as the Boy Scouts has the autonomy, the freedom to decide what its character is going to be, what its identity and its values are going to be, and that outsiders, including the government, cannot force those organizations to be something different or to change their identity. This situation is obviously different, right? This is the Boy Scouts themselves making the decision to change their identity and their character, which they're totally free to do. Nobody's here to argue that the Boy Scouts are not, as an organization, don't have the freedom through their executive body to do that. The question is whether that is the wise thing to do for the Boy Scouts, and I think the majority of callers, at least, and I would assume the majority of people across the country think, that it's a shame, that it's not a good thing for the Boy Scouts to do that because you're essentially erasing your character. And I can't remember who told it to me or where I heard it from, but because I'm not a Boy Scout and wasn't a Boy Scout, but that the origins of the Boy Scouts in America actually were borrowed from the Scouts in Great Britain. Great Britain's had the scouting program for a long time, and it was because whoever started the Scouts in Britain saw that the young boys that were becoming young adolescent men were kind of missing out on what it means to be a quote-unquote true man, and kind of the love of outdoors, the ability to do many of the kind of the physical laborious tasks that men were expected to do back then, and they want and probably still expected to do these days. At least my wife does, and so they realized there's this need for an organization to kind of instill those virtues and qualities into the young boys and young men in Great Britain, and of course that was carried over into the United States. So that was the origins of the Boy Scouts as we know them, and now here we are, however over 100 years later, saying, well, really it's about how many people can we get into an organization to ensure that the organization remains financially solvent.
Another part of the Boy Scouts, I think, when you call somebody a Boy Scout, a lot of times you're saying they're a helpful person, they're a good person, and I also think of chivalry. I think that chivalry and respect for women has been taught in the Boy Scouts traditionally. And, that sort of takes that out of there in a sense. So Boy Scouts had a high view of women. And it's almost like the view of women has been now equalized. Instead of putting women up on a pedestal and being chivalrous, now everybody's in the Boy Scouts. So that's kind of I don't know if people get what I'm thinking, but I feel like that's something, it's a loss.
Well, I don't want to open Pandora's box by bringing in the military aspect of whether we should
You were not a Boy Scout, but you were a Marine.
Oh, I am a
Marine.
And the decision to allow women into combat positions. But I will speak only from my personal experience, is that having served in an infantry battalion in Afghanistan, where it was at that time only men allowed in the infantry battalion, and when we were out past friendly lines, let's just put it that way, and again it was an all male unit, the atmosphere and the camaraderie and things of that nature that were part of our unit changed dramatically when we kind of returned back to our home base and we were once again in a co-ed environment, so to speak, and we were surrounded and mixed in with female troops and Marines and soldiers. And it's not necessarily that one was better or worse. It's just that it dramatically changed. Again, I'm not saying one was better or worse. I'm just saying it changed. Just without being told, we just had to act different because you're now around women. And so that's just my own anecdotal experience, that I think we can expect the same thing to happen with the Boy Scouts, is that it is going to change at the organic level within the Boy Scouts. It's not going to be the same anymore.
You just lose something. And so we're, in a sense here on Point of View, we're mourning that loss. We'll be back, and again, we continue to take your calls, 800-351-1212. If you can get in, be patient. We'll be right back. There's not an American who doesn't decry the shocking Las Vegas murders, but we as a nation turn our backs on the torture of unborn babies. In recent days, the House of Representatives voted to curtail late-term abortions by passing the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. This law makes it a crime to perform most abortions after the 20-week mark in a pregnancy. Abortionists violating this law could face 5 years in prison. The House has passed pain-capable acts before, always under the threat of a presidential veto. The bill now awaits action in the Senate, having been introduced by South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham. The president is ready and willing to sign it. Most abortions at this stage are performed by dismemberment and decapitation. The baby is torn limb from limb. The abortionist goes in blind and pulls parts out. Watch a sonogram of this and you'll see the baby recoil, attempting to avoid the abortionist's clamp. There's a wealth of medical evidence showing that at 20 weeks, 5 months gestation, an unborn baby can feel pain. By 20 weeks, nerve endings have spread to all parts of the developing child's skin. One doctor, a professor of neurobiology and pediatrics, testified in a House hearing that the unborn child is capable of reacting to pain at 8 to 10 weeks gestation. We go all out to see that 22-week-old preemies survive, and yet we allow babies roughly that age to be torn apart in the womb. Tony Perkins of Family Research Council says this pain-capable bill conforms federal abortion law to modern science. Vulnerable Democrat senators in red states need to do some soul-searching. Will they stand with their constituents or vote with their party? Democrat votes are needed to overcome the inevitable filibuster and make up for a couple of Republicans who historically yield to the abortion lobby. We are one of only 7 nations who allow this inhumane treatment of unborn children. We must drop out of that brutal club. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for participating in the conversation. We're going to try to get to a few more calls, but I want to ask Mike, because he brought up the military and his experience as being a Marine. And, of course, the Marines was probably it was the branch of the military that stood longest against bringing women in. There are a lot of good reasons for that. But, you know, it's like, and I think this would be true with Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts mixing too, that guys, when they're separate, they act a little less proper. They're a little less perhaps on edge about things. And, you know, they act different. And I think girls act different when they're together without guys too. So if you start to, and there's so many ways in which we are now de-recognizing gender anyway in the culture. But if you start to sort of take this away, this idea of acting different or treating women differently, I think what happens is the guys begin to stop any modicum of respect for the opposite gender in a sense, or stop acting differently with girls around and not with girls around. I don't think that's a good development. I think it's good that there are differences and that there's some sort of a, the guys that will act differently. They'll up their game a little bit with the girls around, but sometimes they need to be allowed to just be guys.
Yeah, I didn't study, gender studies in college or anything like that.
Neither did I, obviously.
I'm not an expert in that field. I can only speak from my own experiences, but I'll never forget my commanding officer in Afghanistan. And again, I was with an infantry battalion, and at that time, it was all males. And at one point, a different unit had kind of, this happened for people who serve the military, they'll completely understand what I'm talking about. Another unit had sent like a small team of people to just kind of help augment and help us out with some of the stuff that we needed to be done. And that team that was sent to us from the other unit had a couple of females in it. And like I said, it was just, things became very, let's just say, awkward for a little while. And it's not that, people were totally professional, but you could just sense there was something different around, in the atmosphere. And I'll never forget my commanding officer basically, made the decision to send that team back and ask the next time they send a team out, please let it be all male. And of course, some people were like, well, why? Why do you care? Or what's the big deal? Are you afraid that something bad? And he said, no. He said, we are fighting a dangerous enemy. We were, just mere hundreds of yards away from the Taliban at that time. And he said, we have people out there that want to kill us. I cannot afford for my Marines to lose focus for even 1 minute or 1 second. And that, I'm not saying that will cause them to lose focus. I'm saying it. But if I even think that it's an opportunity for them to lose focus, why would I even take the risk? Why would I even take the risk? And I really respected that decision, that he didn't care about the political and policy debates of it. He cared about making sure his Marines got home safe to their families, and that anything that even had the potential to detract from that, he wasn't going to allow it to happen. And I think that was a wise decision, and I supported it. And so obviously that's very different from what we're seeing with the Boy Scouts. But again, anything that detracts you from your mission and takes your focus away from your mission, I just think it deserves a long, hard look and not just a simple dollars and cents approach.
I think the mission is important today. I think we're in some cultural battles that are extremely important. We need young men to grow up into leaders who are going to lead the culture back to something that's going to survive. And so when you rip out something that has been so good and helpful to train young men, and you kind of rip the foundations out from under it, I think you are disarming, in a sense, in the way that your commander was worried about disarming or weakening you. So I think there's a big parallel there. And I think many Americans don't understand it because we walk so far away from it. But I'd love to see us walk back in the right direction. This is not a good development. Let's go to Bob in Maine. Bob wants to talk about the Girl Scouts. And, this is kind of sad for the Girl Scouts. They've been undermining themselves with political correctness. But this is kind of saying, well, we don't really trust the Girl Scouts to train leaders the way the Boy Scouts do, so we're going to take over. Anyway, Bob, what is your comment about the Girl Scouts?
Hi. It's not so much about the Girl Scouts, but it is and it isn't. I think they've been indoctrinated somewhat by Planned Parenthood, and so has the public schools. And I think this move will definitely, unfortunately, I hope not, but I'm sure it will, infiltrate into the joint combination of male, female Boy Scouts.
Yeah, it could. It could. The Planned Parenthood sort of aura, agenda, free sex, really doesn't matter about marriage and things like that.
Oh, they've been overt with the Girl Scouts. They have Planned Parenthood people, speakers, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, thank you. That's a good point, and it's very true. We've been watching that for years and decrying it. Let's go back to the phones. Speak with. We have another caller from Maine, so let's go to Steve, listening in on WSEW. Hi, Steve.
Hi, how you doing?
Great.
Yeah, I think that, the first caller that I heard was talking, and he's an Eagle Scout, and he was talking about, that he didn't think there was an issue. And I'm just like, well, I kind of agree with you. Your viewpoint on that is the Boy Scouts are the Boy Scouts, and they have boys who are being brought up and trained to be men. The Girl Scouts have girls who are being brought up and raised to be women. And there's differences in the way that you do that. And I think the two organizations need to be separate just for that purpose.
Very good point, succinct. And Michael, both of us have kids, and we've had boys and girls. And there are different ways you even bring up kids that are of the opposite sexes, aren't there?
Well, yeah, as the parent of 2 boys and 2 girls, all but one of whom is basically a teenager at this point. That's why I don't have any hair, for those who can't see me.
I've met Mike's kids. They're wonderful kids.
They're great kids. But yes, there are. I couldn't even begin to count the differences in just it's the little thing. It's little nuanced things that and how you deal with a girl who's crying or hurt, and how you deal with a boy who's upset. Or how, in fact, I was just sharing with Penna during one of the breaks that our family is facing the unfortunate situation this weekend of we're having to put down some beloved pets of ours, 2 of our dogs. And it's amazing to watch the reaction of our boys to that news that we're about to lose the family pet, the family dog, versus the way that the girls respond to that. And so then my response as a parent is then kind of driven by their response. And my oldest, who's a boy, he's about to be a 14-year-old boy, it's amazing to see that's probably like the prime age, right, for when you would expect somebody to be in the Boy Scouts and really kind of finding their way, is about the 13, 14-year-old age, and kind of very stoic. I
Really?
know that he's upset, but he's trying to demonstrate his kind of that he's independent. He's becoming a man, and he doesn't want to show that emotion. Whereas my 10-year-old boy, my youngest, is a 10-year-old boy, and he's devastated, and he's letting it show. And so he hasn't reached that point yet. And it's just, you learn something every day as a parent. And the differences between boys and girls is just one of the many things.
I want to say thank you to everybody that called in on this issue and all the other issues on Point of View today. We have a lot of calls still waiting that we are unable to take. But thank you, because I think it really made the show, and it was good to have this discussion. Mike, I think our listeners are going to be praying for you this weekend as you go through this with your family, because a lot of people can relate. Most of us can relate to losing a pet at one time or another. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have a great weekend. Andrew, thank you. Shamila, thank you. And Steve, our producer, thank you so much for what you did to make this program happen today. God bless you. And Mike, really great having you in.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you next week.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net, or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.